Well, hello, everybody. This is Camille Grant here at Mayfield. So happy to have a good friend, Ashwin Rangan, here to join us today for a podcast for the CXO of the Future podcast series. So, Ashwin, you've got we've known each other for, 10 or more years, which has been great. I think we got to know each other when you were at Edwards Lifesciences, but you've got an amazing background. So today you're Senior Vice President of Engineering and CIO at ICANN, which is amazing all by itself. And you've been there nearly 10 years, I think. You were at Wal-Mart.com. You were at Bank of America. You've been at various other technology companies, plus, of course, as I mentioned, Edwards Lifesciences. I remember you talking about the heart stents and all these sorts of wild things at that time. So can you open, Ashwin, just by telling us a little bit about how you started your career? What was your first job?
Gabriel, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me as a guest. I appreciate it. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to share a few of my learnings along the way and my experiences. So thank you so much for making the opportunity available. My very first job in the United States was to work for what at that time, and I'm talking 40 years ago now, I'm dating myself. It's 1984. And at the time, when I first came into the country, I was looking for a high-tech opportunity. The technology industry was very concentrated back in the day. If you remember, it was the days of the mainframe computer.
Yep.
And the PC revolution had only just begun because IBM had made a personal computer and Apple was starting to spring up on different desktops, but there were few, very expensive and far between. So it was still the days of the mainframe and COBOL and mainframe databases. So as I started to look around, a good friend eventually offered me a position with an aerospace and defense company. It was a second-tier aerospace and defense company supplying into the top tiers. And it was a company which is now called Ducommun Aerostructures. What I learned after I joined them is that Ducommun was the very first company incorporated in California.
Wow.
So it has a storied history, but eventually they got into aerospace and defense by making P-45 trainers during World War II, and eventually that in line. So I joined what was then called the data processing department and became a member of that team. As luck would have it, the Space Shuttle Challenger suffered a disaster while I was still a member of that team. And our business, which was largely on defense contracts, literally dried up overnight because every defense contract in the nation was put on hold, awaiting the outcome of the investigations, which eventually showed that the O-ring was responsible. But that took months. It took actually more than a year. It was a year and a half before that determination was conclusive and contracts started to open up. But in the process, the company, which at the time was employing about 600 people, went down to a bare backbone of 80 people. Wow. Essentially 85% layoff overnight. And I happen to be one of the few people that was retained, but on certain very specific terms. So the head of finance and DP called me in and said, I'm going to keep you on two conditions. One, that you will do whatever it takes to keep my data processing shop running. And two, in return, I realize that you are an immigrant and you need papers, so I'll be happy to get those papers for you, your green card to be processed.
Wow.
I was immensely grateful because otherwise I didn't know what would happen. But it also became the foundation for me in time because I was doing everything from running twisted pair wires to doing database reorganizations and COBOL programming for front end and this and that and the other. So there was not an aspect of IT that I didn't have to do over 3 years, which became a bedrock on which I've continued to build because there are no mysteries left in information technology. I mean, everything is an evolution on what I've learned. Yes. So there's nothing so dramatically different that it escapes me completely.
So it sounds like the opportunity that forced your feet to fire, so to speak, in this environment was really a fast learning opportunity for you that perhaps you wouldn't have been able to achieve anywhere else. So unfortunate for the O-ring, unfortunate for the shuttle, but amazing opportunity for you to get access to a lot of skill development really fast.
So true that. It's so true. I mean, I would never have imagined that I would be a database administrator otherwise, or I was an analyst and a programmer secondarily, but I never thought I would deal with databases or hardware or having to change disks or run operations at night or run reports at night. Or I did everything because those were the terms of the deal. And there you go.
So how do you apply sort of this entry data processing IT role to today, where you're senior vice president of engineering, you've got a large team, you're also the global CIO, you've got a responsibility for strategy, architecture, operations, people. How do you apply what you learned then to now?
I became CIO a long time ago. I first became CIO in 1998 when I served Rockwell International. As you probably recall, Rockwell International was this ginormous conglomerate.
Yes.
And I was appointed CIO and officer of the company in 1998. I was relatively young at the time and elated, to say the least, of being given that opportunity. So I called a mentor of mine. He's been somebody that I've relied on advice forever. He'd embraced me in spite of my being an immigrant, or perhaps because.
Yes.
And he has literally guided every step of my measured way, so to speak, and been there when I took a misstep and taught me how to correct my errors or omissions and go back and retrace my footsteps and all that. So I called him, and I remember he was as excited with my promotion. He said, "Can we meet tonight?" And we got together, and he said something that I found incredible. And ever since I found it to be just as incredible. He said, "You're now Chief Information Officer." He said, "The first word there is chief. The second word is information for information technology. But the most important word is officer." And I said, "Expand on that, if you will." And he said, "Look, you're a chief. That means you have to lead people. And you have to lead people with kindness and compassion. They're looking to you to show them the way. You've got a good history of finding the way. And therefore now your obligation is to show them the way. They don't know. You're supposed to know. So your work now is to find the way regularly and lead people. That's the job of a chief."
Wow. That's such a great summary.
Yeah.
And I love the officer interpretation there, which is this kind notion.
Exactly. That's where he went next. He said, as an officer, he said, "You've heard the term officer and the gentleman. That's exactly who you're supposed to be, because you will cast a long shadow, and everything that you say, everything that you do and don't do will be watched, and people will be judging you for every moment of who you are. So you better be a gentleman first, because that's what officers are."
Okay, this is my new tagline for you, Ash, the officer and a gentleman. Well done. Let me now dive into leadership.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to share your perspective of a very important leadership skill that you either have honed or you believe is most important, and how exactly it works. So do you have one that you could share?
Yes, indeed. One of the things that I like to do is to create deliberate discussion around difficult topics. So let me explain that. When I assemble my leadership team and there is a contentious topic, one of the first things that happens is the naming of one of them as devil's advocate. That's a part and parcel of how I operate. So people eagerly look forward to the opportunity to be given the devil's advocate position, because they have complete license to take a diametrically opposite view. And there'll be debates because they will hold forth saying, prove me wrong. And in the course of proving them wrong, somebody has to come up with the right arguments and vice versa.
Yep.
What that does is it exposes the spectrum of possibilities so that now the team has the ability to look at many facets of the problem at hand and therefore come up with a good, if not a better solution. And I've found that to be, it's empowering on the one side because people feel free to talk if they feel that they have an opposing view, even though they may not have a devil's advocate position legitimately awarded them. It just creates this openness and transparent environment, which I like. But from a business outcomes perspective, it creates the right environment to come up with a better decision because more facets have now been examined more thoroughly than otherwise would be.
And what happens when you reach some sort of log jam in that sort of conversation? What is your leadership function to keep it moving, let's say, in the right direction?
It's funny you should ask that. I have a lady who also reports to me in my leadership team. And I had asked her the same question. I said, what do you find interesting working with me? She said, you know, usually you're a chill guy and you let us debate things. And, you know, we more often than not arrive at a decision. But when we get into a logjam, you're never hesitant to jump in and make a decision. Say, this is what I want you to do. And then you quickly move on to the next thing, not giving too much of an opportunity for further debate. And I said, yep, that's exactly who I am.
So that's an important skill beyond just the debate, which is knowing when to leverage perhaps all of that great input from the team. They shared their points of view. You assimilate it quickly and then move forward.
Indeed.
Awesome. So last question for you. This is about looking toward the future. And as you think about advancing technology, advancing skill sets that are needed in organizations, advancing problems that need to be solved, what do you think, as you predict, what is the must-have skill or technology that you believe we should all elevate up that we're not maybe giving enough attention to?
You know, if you look back on the history of computing and information technology, I think there have been specific and historic moments of discontinuities. And each one of them has been a call to arms to lean in and understand sooner rather than later the latent potential in the discontinuity. Those that have reaped the rewards, and those that didn't have become the digital equipment corporations of the world, so to speak, right? They have not been quick enough to react, or they leaned too far back on hubris, and therefore they lost the race in the process. So when I think back, there are clear, specific transitions that I think of. You know, the mainframe to the PC was a huge transition. The PC to the internet was a huge transition. The internet to the mobile internet with smartphones, huge transition. The advent of blockchains as a new technology, huge transition, creating huge new opportunities. And the most recent one is generative AI. Huge transition, huge opportunities. Each one of them is huge transition, huge opportunities. Trillions of dollars, in other words, right? With all of them, the one common factor that I think about, and I think about this a lot because it's a very existential question. And that question that I ask of myself is, how quickly can I forget? Because that is more important than how quickly can I learn and understand something new. Because my ability to give up on things that I took for granted is more important than my ability to understand something new and embrace it. Because if I don't give up what I already know, not only is it occupying dead space, but it's pulling me in a direction that it shouldn't, because it's no longer true. I cannot take generative AI, just to make a mockery of this argument and say, we really ought to be writing COBOL code on an IBM mainframe. I mean, the two just do not live together.
Right.
So I have to give up on the one so that not only am I making place for the other, but that deliberate action is making me go towards the new and saying, I need to embrace this and do it faster because there is incredible potential here. And if I don't do that, I'm going to miss out on an opportunity.
So have enough discipline to give up the past to allow the future even to have oxygen in a way.
Yes.
Oh, well, and I think that's, you often hear organizations, we're spending 80-90% of our time maintaining the old.
Yeah.
And you can see how that sort of, and maybe that's the right number or not, I don't know, but when you have to have that amount of attention on the past, so to speak, you're not going to have much allowance for anything new, either culture, technology, skill set, or anything. So allowing time for new, essentially. That's awesome. So Ashwin, one last question. You've got a long-standing career, very successful. You do volunteering work. You traveled around the world. You're a global CIO. What's a takeaway that you want to offer to the up-and-coming CIOs and IT leaders of the world?
Once again, I lean on my mentor who has taught me so much, to whom I'm so indebted. I'll never be able to repay him the debt that I owe him in this lifetime. It may take many lifetimes. At that seminal moment when I first became CIO, during that next meeting that we had, he also said something to me. He said, Ashwin, this is the start of your career, and there is an incredible arc ahead of you. You don't know it, but you'll see it in retrospect. He said to me, a lot of people will reach out to you to do some really important work. I know that. Just remember, the work is really important. You, my friend, are not really important. Just make sure that it doesn't go to your head. I have tried to live that every day, reminding myself that, it is me doing unto others like I would have them do unto me, and to remain grounded and be humble, because I didn't do anything particularly different to be who I am. I was just gifted to be what I am, and therefore have the humility to say thank you and move on every day.
So put ego aside and remember, you're here to serve.
You're here to serve. And I use that word serve more often than most people do, I think, because that's exactly who I think of myself as. I am here to serve.
Yeah, that's such an awesome takeaway. And I think that's where that kindness, that officer and a gentleman comes in as well. Thoughtful to who you're here to help and why. Yeah. Well, Ashwin, thank you once again. And this is Gamil Gran once again here from Mayfield for the CXO of the Future podcast series. Appreciate all of your listeners, and Ashwin, appreciate your time today. Really honored to have you be part of our event.
Thank you so much, Gamil. Wonderful to see you again.
Great.
Take care.